January 3, 1945. The frost bites hard across the Ardennes forest. Smoke curls from distant artillery, mixing with the damp, earthy scent of mud and decaying leaves. A convoy of retreating German soldiers halts at the edge of a shattered clearing, eyes scanning for abandoned Allied supplies. A crate, worn but intact, sits half-buried in the frozen ground. Curious hands pry it open. Inside, neatly packed tins, chocolate bars, biscuits, and powdered coffee reveal themselves in precise, methodical order. The German officers exchange glances, suspicion first, then disbelief. These were no ordinary rations. The packaging, the variety, the care taken to preserve calories, nutrition, and convenience, everything spoke of a machine far larger than their own war-worn supply lines. As they examine the contents, a quiet realization settles among them. This simple box, a K-Ration, is more than sustenance. It is proof of a nation capable of feeding an army across oceans, sustaining campaigns that stretch across continents. In these neatly wrapped meals lay the invisible hand of industrial might, organizational precision, and inexhaustible resources. And in that moment, the officers understood something the battlefield had yet to tell them. Victory might already be slipping through their fingers. By late 1944, the Second World War had stretched across continents for over 5 years. Europe was a continent in flames. Germany, once the unchallenged force of Blitzkrieg, was now fighting a defensive battle on multiple fronts. The Eastern Front bled manpower against the relentless Soviet advance, while in the West, Allied forces had landed in Normandy 6 months earlier and were pushing through France with overwhelming force. The United States, having joined the conflict in December 1941 after the attack on Pearl Harbor, had spent the intervening years mobilizing its immense industrial base. Factories that once produced cars, refrigerators, and consumer goods were now churning out tanks, aircraft, artillery, and ships at unprecedented rates. The scale of American mobilization was staggering. By 1944, the U.S. produced nearly half of all Allied military equipment. But production alone did not win wars. The logistical genius behind supplying millions of soldiers in distant theaters of war was equally decisive. Among the most telling examples of this logistical power were the K-Rations, a compact, prepackaged field meal designed to sustain a single soldier for a day. Unlike traditional army rations, which required preparation or were bulky and perishable, K-Rations were lightweight, nutritionally balanced, and easy to distribute. Each ration contained a standardized supply of calories, protein, and vitamins, carefully engineered to keep soldiers alert and effective, even under the harshest conditions. For the average German soldier, the sight of these rations was both alien and unnerving. German field rations, often limited and repetitive, could not match the variety or caloric content of the American packages. The K-Rations' combination of canned meat, biscuits, chocolate, powdered beverages, and chewing gum reflected more than culinary choice. It revealed the ability of the United States to feed its armies anywhere in the world, for weeks or months at a time, without strain. This disparity was not merely a matter of comfort, it had tactical and strategic consequences. Soldiers who were well-fed, rested, and properly supplied moved faster, endured longer marches, and maintained higher morale. Meanwhile, German units, increasingly short of provisions, struggled to maintain cohesion under the relentless pressure of the Allied advance. The contrast between abundance and scarcity was stark and telling. Beyond the front lines, the industrial and logistical capacities of the U.S. allowed Allied commanders to plan operations of unprecedented scale. Massive stockpiles of supplies could be transporting across the Atlantic, unloaded at ports in England, and forwarded to the front lines with remarkable speed. Each K-Ration, each crate of ammunition, each barrel of fuel was a piece of a vast, well-oiled machine, one that Germany increasingly could not hope to match. The introduction of K-Rations in the field was part of a broader American effort to standardize and optimize military supply chains. Soldiers were trained to rely on these rations, knowing that they could march, fight, and survive without cumbersome preparation. For commanders, the predictability of supply allowed for more aggressive strategies, faster advances, and longer campaigns without the constant worry of local foraging or ad hoc provisions. When German officers first encountered these rations in late 1944, their reactions were not merely about curiosity over the food itself. They recognized, in that moment, the scale of the American war machine, a force capable of sustaining millions of men across oceans, through mud, snow, and battle. In these neatly wrapped meals lay the invisible proof of industrial supremacy, logistical precision, and unyielding manpower. The encounter with the K-Rations was a small yet potent symbol of a larger truth. Germany was being outproduced, outsupplied, and ultimately outmatched. The battlefield might still be contested, but the war's underlying arithmetic was becoming unmistakably clear. This recognition naturally leads into the second section of Context, which will explore the intricacies of American logistics and the deeper strategic implications of supply superiority. Story of the K-Ration cannot be separated from the larger narrative of American military logistics. By 1944, the United States had built an infrastructure capable of moving vast quantities of men, weapons, and provisions across oceans and continents, a feat unparalleled in human history. Ports, railways, depots, and convoys worked in near-perfect synchronization, allowing Allied forces to project power deep into Europe while maintaining a relentless operational tempo. The K-Ration was emblematic of this system. Designed in 1941 by the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps under the supervision of nutritionists and engineers, it was intended for temporary use, planned for soldiers on short-term missions or in emergency scenarios. Yet its design reflected a far greater ambition: to allow an army to operate independently of local resources, sustained entirely by an industrial homeland thousands of miles away. Each ration, carefully portioned and fortified, was a single cog in a massive logistical engine, ensuring that American forces could fight in the snow of Belgium or the deserts of North Africa with the same efficiency as in the heartland factories of Ohio or Michigan. In contrast, Germany's war effort was increasingly hampered by its stretched supply lines and dwindling resources. The Wehrmacht, once masters of rapid movement and surprise attacks, struggled to feed, fuel, and reinforce units on multiple fronts. Soldiers often relied on captured supplies or local foraging, while industrial output lagged far behind the Allied powers. The disparity was growing more than evident. One side moved with the confidence of a well-fed, well-equipped machine, the other with the constant anxiety of shortages and attrition. The logistical superiority of the Allies extended beyond food. Fuel, ammunition, medical supplies, and spare parts flowed with a regularity that allowed sustained offensives. Every K-Ration opened on the front lines was a microcosm of this efficiency. The packaging alone demonstrated meticulous planning: waterproof containers, standardized portions, and durable packaging designed to survive transit across ships, trucks, and battlefields. It was a small, everyday object that silently conveyed a vast strategic advantage. For German officers, encountering these rations was a moment of sobering clarity. They could see, in the simple arrangement of cans and bars, the invisible networks of factories, transport, and planning that fed the American war effort. It was a stark contrast to the dwindling rations and overstretched supply lines of their own forces, a reminder that industrial might, as much as battlefield tactics, dictated the war's outcome. The implications went beyond the immediate encounter. Soldiers well-fed with K-Rations were more alert, better able to endure long marches, and capable of executing complex maneuvers under fire. Commanders could plan operations without pausing for ad hoc resupply. Supply chains became instruments of strategy, not mere support, enabling the Allies to maintain pressure on multiple fronts simultaneously. Each K-Ration was a testament to foresight, planning, and the industrial muscle of a nation fully mobilized for war. This systemic advantage would define the campaigns of late 1944 and early 1945. From the Ardennes to the Rhineland, the U.S. Army's ability to feed, equip, and sustain its forces allowed it to maintain operational flexibility and strategic initiative. In contrast, the Germans, despite their skill and bravery, were increasingly constrained by the limits of their logistics, a vulnerability laid bare by the seemingly mundane encounter with American rations. The arrival of K-Rations on German radar was more than a curiosity. It was an indicator of the inevitable shift in the balance of power. These small, portable meals highlighted a broader truth. The war was no longer only a contest of guns and tactics, but also a contest of production, supply, and the capacity to sustain a modern army across vast distances. The German realization over crate of K-Rations sets the stage for examining multiple angles of the event: human, tactical, technological, leadership, enemy, and moral, that together reveal why this seemingly minor encounter held outsized significance. Human angle. War is often measured in statistics: battles won, cities taken, casualties counted, but its true impact is felt in the experience of individual soldiers. For the men consuming K-Rations, these compact meals were more than mere sustenance. They provided energy, comfort, and a semblance of consistency amid chaos. A soldier marching through the frozen forests of Belgium or the mud of northern France could rely on a predictable, nourishing meal each day, no matter the conditions. This reliability bolstered morale, fostered resilience, and allowed troops to endure extreme physical and psychological stress. For German soldiers observing these rations, the human reality hit hard. The Allies were not just better equipped, they were better sustained. Tactical angle. Logistics often decides the pace of campaigns. The mobility of the U.S. Army in late 1944 was inextricably tied to its ability to supply soldiers efficiently. K-Rations enabled units to operate independently for days, eliminating the need to scavenge or establish complex supply points in contested territory. Commanders could plan aggressive maneuvers without fear of starvation or exhaustion, extending operational reach and increasing flexibility. In contrast, German units were hampered by slower, more vulnerable supply lines, leaving them unable to respond quickly to Allied advances. The presence of K-Rations on the battlefield exemplified this tactical edge, a seemingly simple meal empowering sustained offensive capability. Technological/production angle. The K-Ration was a marvel of mid-20th century engineering. Devised by the Quartermaster Corps in 1941, its design emphasized preservation, portability, and nutritional balance. Freeze-dried coffee, canned meat, biscuits, and chocolate bars were packed with precision. Each component was calculated to provide maximum calories and vitamins with minimal bulk. This level of standardization reflected a broader industrial achievement. The U.S. could mass-produce millions of identical rations, distribute them across oceans, and ensure they reached soldiers intact. For the German officers who opened these crates, the technological implications were clear. This was not a temporary convenience. It was proof of an industrial nation fully committed to sustaining global warfare. The three angles, human, tactical, technological, intertwined to show that K-Rations were not merely food, but instruments of warfare. They sustained soldiers, shaped tactics, and demonstrated industrial capability in miniature. Yet these perspectives only capture half of the story. The enemy's perception, leadership decisions, and psychological impact complete the picture. Enemy angles. For German officers encountering K-Rations on the battlefield, the reaction was immediate and visceral. These were men trained to assess threats, yet a crate of food revealed a danger far beyond the immediate front. The neatly packed tins, chocolate, and biscuits symbolized an enemy with industrial capacity and logistical mastery that Germany could not match. They recognized that the Allies could feed, move, and sustain armies across vast distances without strain. In essence, a simple ration highlighted the growing gap between German capability and Allied power, a gap that would determine the outcome of campaigns before a single shot was fired. Leadership angle. Commanders on both sides understood that wars are won not only through battlefield maneuvers, but through planning, foresight, and resource management. For American leaders, K-Rations were a strategic tool. Soldiers who could march farther, fight longer, and remain alert meant commanders could execute complex operations with confidence. Conversely, German leaders faced the daunting reality of stretched supply lines, overextended troops, and dwindling resources. The sight of these rations reinforced the tactical advantage enjoyed by American commanders and underscored the consequences of being outproduced and outsupplied at the strategic level. Moral/psychological angle. Beyond nutrition and tactics. K-Rations carried a subtle psychological impact. For Allied troops, they provided reassurance, a tangible guarantee that the army could care for them even in the harshest conditions. For German soldiers and officers, however, they were a source of unease and intimidation. The simple act of opening a ration box became a moment of realization. The enemy possessed a depth of resources and planning that was beyond immediate comprehension. Morale, after all, is as much about perception as reality, and these rations communicated a quiet, unspoken truth. The industrial and organizational weight of the United States was a force in itself, capable of shaping the war's trajectory. Taken together, these angles demonstrate that K-Rations were far more than sustenance. They were instruments of war, sustaining soldiers, shaping strategy, and signaling industrial supremacy. The German encounter with these rations was a microcosm of the larger conflict, a moment where logistics, leadership, and human experience converged to reveal the underlying balance of power. December 1944. The Ardennes forest was shrouded in cold mist, the ground slick with frost and mud. German troops, emboldened by the surprise of the Ardennes offensive, moved cautiously through the dense trees. Supply lines were stretched, trucks laden with rations and ammunition stalled in the snow, and officers knew that every day of advance came at the cost of dwindling resources. It was in this tense environment that a small reconnaissance unit stumbled upon an abandoned American supply cache. Wooden crates, stamped with U.S. insignia, were scattered among the trees. The officers approached cautiously, weapons at the ready, expecting the usual, scattered ammunition, maybe a few tins of food. Instead, they found K-Rations, stacked neatly in waterproof containers. Each package, perfectly preserved despite the winter's chill, was a testament to meticulous planning. Opening a single crate, an officer inspected the contents. Canned meat labeled with precise nutritional information, biscuits individually wrapped for freshness, chocolate bars to boost morale, powdered coffee and drink mixes designed to sustain alertness. He flipped through the packaging, noting the efficiency, the standardization, the foresight. This was not a minor logistical convenience. This was a glimpse into the immense machinery sustaining the American soldier. Factories churning out identical rations by the millions, shipping networks stretching across the Atlantic, and a planning system capable of sustaining armies anywhere on the map. A quiet murmur ran through the German officers. They had known the US was powerful, had seen the massive convoys arriving in Europe, and understood that the Allies' industrial output dwarfed their own. But this moment crystallized the reality in tangible form. A simple meal, small enough to carry on a soldier's back, revealed the scale of the war machine that Germany faced. It was the war condensed into a crate: production, logistics, nutrition, morale, and planning. The implications were immediate. German officers realized that no battlefield victory could permanently alter the strategic imbalance. Even if they succeeded tactically, the Americans could sustain their forces indefinitely, replace losses effortlessly, and maintain momentum across multiple fronts. The rations were proof that Germany was fighting an enemy not just of weapons and men, but of organization, production, and relentless industrial might. This confrontation, though small in scale, was emblematic of a turning point. It signaled the moment when German forces, already stretched thin, began to internalize the inevitability of defeat. The Ardennes would see fierce fighting, but the underlying arithmetic of war, the combination of industrial production, supply chains, and troop sustenance, was increasingly favoring the Allies. From this realization, the narrative naturally moves into the second part of the climax: how the broader campaigns and operational outcomes reflected the advantage symbolized by the K-Rations, and how these seemingly minor details shaped the ultimate trajectory of the war. As the Ardennes offensive unfolded in December 1944, the consequences of logistical disparity became increasingly apparent. German troops, despite their initial surprise and momentum, struggled with dwindling supplies. Fuel, ammunition, and food were all in short supply, and every advance strained already overextended lines. In contrast, American forces, well-fed and fully equipped, could respond with mobility and precision that German commanders could neither predict nor counter effectively. Reports from the front highlight the psychological impact of these rations. Officers noted that even a brief encounter with American K-Rations provoked a sense of unease among their men. The neatly packaged food was a visible manifestation of an enemy capable of sustaining prolonged operations. One German officer later reflected that the moment he held a K-ration was a revelation, small, ordinary, yet impossibly vast in its implications. These rations were not merely sustenance, they were a symbol of strategic inevitability. Operationally, the U.S. Army leveraged this logistical superiority to maintain pressure across multiple sectors simultaneously. While German units attempted to regroup or forage, American forces advanced relentlessly, supported by well-stocked depots and efficient transport networks. The Battle of the Bulge, though fierce and costly, revealed the limits of German endurance against an enemy whose supply lines were resilient and adaptable. Each American soldier, armed not only with weapons but with reliable nourishment and provisions, became part of a system that amplified combat effectiveness far beyond individual skill or courage. The turning point was not marked by a single clash of arms, but by the cumulative effect of preparation and provision. German officers recognized that no tactical brilliance could compensate for systemic disadvantage. The K-rations, once a mundane aspect of daily soldier life, had transformed into a tangible measure of industrial power and strategic foresight. They illustrated that the outcome of campaigns depended as much on the capacity to sustain forces as on battlefield heroics. This realization would resonate beyond the Ardennes, shaping German expectations in subsequent engagements. Officers and soldiers alike internalized the sobering fact that America's capacity to feed, supply, and maintain its armies effectively created a strategic momentum that Germany could no longer match. What began as a curious inspection of a ration crate evolved into an acknowledgement of inevitable defeat. From this climactic recognition, the narrative naturally flows into the aftermath, exploring the consequences of American logistical supremacy on German morale, operational decisions, and the ultimate outcome of the war. The encounter with K-rations marked a subtle yet profound turning point in the minds of German officers. While the front lines continued to erupt with artillery fire and small unit skirmishes, the realization of America's logistical might weigh heavily. Soldiers who had once believed in rapid victories now understood that the industrial and organizational capacity of the United States would sustain its forces far longer than Germany could. The battlefields of the Ardennes, the Rhineland, and beyond were no longer just contests of tactics. They were arenas shaped by supply, endurance, and material abundance. For German units, shortages were acute. Fuel convoys were delayed by Allied interdiction, ammunition depots ran low, forcing units to conserve and ration firepower. Food was inconsistent, often reliant on captured or locally sourced provisions, which could not match the reliability of American rations. Commanders faced impossible decisions: advance with exhausted troops, or halt and risk losing momentum. Every step forward was a gamble against the clock and dwindling resources, highlighting the strategic imbalance between the two forces. Conversely, the U.S. Army's ability to supply troops consistently created a decisive advantage. K-rations exemplified the broader logistics network. Soldiers were fed, healthy, and ready to move. Convoys moved with precision, depots were stocked in advance, and transport networks ensured that even units operating at the edge of the front could be sustained. The result was operational flexibility. American commanders could plan offensives, reinforce sectors, and recover from setbacks with confidence that their forces would remain combat effective. Morale, both human and institutional, reflected this imbalance. Allied troops found reassurance in their dependable rations, while German soldiers confronted the harsh reality of scarcity. The psychological dimension of warfare, confidence, resilience, and perception was heavily influenced by the availability of basic necessities. A simple meal, meticulously prepared and widely available, became a symbol of hope and endurance for one side and a marker of looming defeat for the other. The immediate effect of these advantages was visible on the battlefield. Allied forces, fully supplied and coordinated, were able to repel German advances during the Ardennes offensive and launch subsequent operations with sustained momentum. German units, despite tactical skill and determination, found themselves increasingly reactive, forced to operate within the limits imposed by inadequate logistics. This disparity underscored a fundamental truth of modern warfare. Resources, planning, and supply chains could be as decisive as guns and tanks. The stage was set for the broader consequences of industrial supremacy, which would ripple through the remainder of the European theater. The realizations sparked by a simple ration crate would foreshadow the eventual collapse of German resistance. This naturally leads into Aftermath, Section 2, which will explore the long-term consequences of these logistical realities and their impact on the final months of the war. As 1945 dawned, the implications of the K-Ration encounter became evident across the European theater. German forces, despite fierce resistance, were increasingly unable to match the operational tempo of the Allies. The disparities in supply, manpower, and industrial capacity manifested in repeated setbacks, forcing strategic withdrawals and exposing vulnerabilities that Allied commanders exploited relentlessly. The war's outcome was shaped as much by these unseen advantages as by the battles themselves. Documented reports from German units reflect this growing awareness. Officers noted the consistency and abundance of American provisions with a mix of admiration and despair. In post-war interviews, several admitted that encountering fully supplied American troops, including the presence of K-rations at the front, was a psychological blow. It signaled not only superior organization, but also a capacity for sustained operations that Germany could no longer counter. Where German soldiers marched fatigued and underfed, Allied troops moved efficiently, fed, and alert. The imbalance in logistical support translated directly into battlefield effectiveness. The operational consequences were significant. During the last months of 1944 and early 1945, Allied forces were able to maintain continuous pressure on German defenses across multiple fronts. The Ardennes offensive, initially a daring German gamble, faltered under the relentless response of American troops. As supply lines stretched, German advances stalled, casualties mounted, and morale eroded. The presence of well-supplied Allied forces allowed commanders to rotate units, reinforce key positions, and conduct coordinated offensives, ensuring that every engagement favored those with sustainable logistics. Long-term, the encounter with American rations exemplified the broader industrial disparity that would define the final stages of the war. Germany's inability to match U.S. production of weapons, vehicles, and provisions meant that no tactical ingenuity could reverse strategic decline. By the time the Allies crossed the Rhine and advanced into the heart of Germany, the logistical imbalance had become insurmountable. Every crate, every ration, every fully supplied unit contributed to a momentum that Germany could not hope to halt. In retrospect, K-rations were more than food. They were an instrument of warfare in themselves. They symbolized the organizational foresight, industrial might, and strategic planning that allowed the United States to sustain a global military campaign. German officers, upon encountering them, understood the profound consequences. The war was increasingly determined not only by courage or skill, but by the unseen machinery of production and supply. The humble K-ration had become a mirror reflecting the inevitable outcome of industrial supremacy in modern warfare. In the quiet aftermath of conflict, it is often the smallest details that reveal the largest truths. The encounter between German officers and American K-rations is one such detail, a seemingly mundane event that illuminates the profound realities of modern warfare. These small, carefully packaged meals were not merely sustenance. They were symbols of industrial power, organizational foresight, and the capacity to sustain human endeavor under extreme conditions. The K-ration tells a story beyond calories and chocolate bars. It tells of a nation capable of projecting power across oceans, of factories that never paused, of supply chains that stretched thousands of miles to reach soldiers in the frozen forests of Europe. For the men consuming them, these rations were a lifeline. For those observing them, They were a revelation of a scale of warfare that Germany could no longer contend with. In that moment, the balance of power shifted quietly, invisibly, yet decisively. This episode underscores a timeless lesson. Wars are not won solely by valor or tactics, but by preparation, endurance, and the unseen infrastructure that sustains an army. The human experience, the exhaustion, hunger, and morale of soldiers is inseparable from the material and logistical foundations that support them. The K-Ration, in its simplicity, embodies this principle. And yet there is a humanity in this detail as well. It reminds us that the machinery of war ultimately serves people, that strategy and production are measured not only in numbers, but in the lives they sustain. The German officer's realization, silent and sober, reflects a broader truth. In conflict, understanding the enemy's capacity can be as decisive as any engagement on the battlefield. In the end, the K-Ration is more than a footnote in history. It is a lens through which we can see the interplay of industry, strategy, and human endurance. It is a reminder that even the smallest elements of warfare, meals, supplies, routines, carry the weight of consequence. And it is a testament to the quiet, relentless power of preparation, revealing that victory often lies not in the battles we see, but in the unseen foundations that make them possible.